Yeah, I wish I held your enthusiasm. I really don't. I wanted so badly to care. I wanted so badly to want it to be good. Hello, welcome to Hat Trick. I am Jordan Dollar-Coltman, joined this week by Elliott Tanty. Braydon is MIA. He is on hiatus. He is vacationing somewhere on the coast. And,
prison. He's in prison.
He's in prison. So it'll be Elliott and I. That's what you get. That's all you get. How you doing, Elliott?
Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad one of us showed up. We're going to talk Olympics this week. We've got a couple topics dedicated to that, and then we'll see where it goes. Here we go. Okay, so the Olympics are over. Tokyo 2020. Took them an extra year to get it done, thanks to COVID. But we have now seen the completion of the 2020 games. Lots of great storylines, especially if you're a Canadian fan, which I assume most of our audience is. 24 medals in total. More than they won in Rio, more than they won in London. So a great outing for the Canadian Olympians. The majority of these medals won by women, which is also a great storyline we'll dig into. 7 golds, 6 silvers, and 11 bronzes, and some just, very memorable and very exciting performances. We talked a little bit about this earlier on, I guess right as the Olympics were getting started. We didn't have a show last week, but the week before, right after the opening ceremonies, we had a conversation just about the Olympics are here. What do we think? And now that it's over, Elliott, what are your first takeaways from the Olympics?
Well, I think there was a lot going into this these Olympics. We talked about it a little bit, although I tried to shy away from it because I wanted to see if it was actually going to happen. But there was this whole narrative around this is the first international event after COVID-19, and it's going to be all about the world and everyone coming together again after this horrific moment. And what there's no better place to do than at the Olympics in Olympics 2020 Tokyo. And they certainly worked that narrative pretty hard going into the Olympics, and there was lots of people talking about that. And so that was kind of cognizant in my head throughout these entire games. And I just never really got the sense that actually occurred. I still got the sense that it was, the world is still a little bit weird. People are still sheepish. There was concern from people in Japan about even having the games. There were lots of good stories, like you said, and I don't want to take away from that. But there was a bit of an expectation going into this that this was going to be the world building event, of the decade at least. And that just didn't happen for me. And I don't think I got that sense. And so I'm starting with a negative, and that's what I'd say my first takeaway was.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics are always it always feels a little bit like they're kind of overhyped and under deliver in some ways, some capacity. That seems to be the reality of it. The Olympics in and of themselves are a bit of a paradox, right? They are this beautiful idea in principle of bringing the nations of the world together in somewhat friendly competition, and the idea of uniting through sport and all of these things. And yet, of course, there's also feverish competition, and in certain fields very deep and entrenched rivalry. We all know how intense the hockey tournament gets in the Winter Olympics. There is certainly nothing cordial about it. Basketball is the same way here because you have pros coming and they've got something really truly on the line. Soccer has been the same thing, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, that's the premise. The idea is it's this beautiful coming together of the world, and yet, it's a giant media event, really. It's a giant television show, and it's a huge, money undertaking. And I think that the challenge is whenever that much money is involved in any kind of organization, it is ripe for, controversy. It's ripe for greed. It's ripe for all these kind of things that tarnish the bigger overall idealism of the idea. And I think that this, because of the situation, is even more of the fact this year, right? Tokyo, the people of Tokyo were pretty loud in saying, we're not really sure this is a good idea. You look at the numbers in Japan, not really safe. We can say, I guess the silver lining is, from a Canadian perspective, our athletes were able to get through it safely, and we didn't have any reported COVID cases. That's great. Good news. We also talked, on the last episode, I'm always torn on this because it's like, I feel for these athletes, they are truly dedicating themselves, and the majority of them are amateurs. And this is, most of these athletes are competing in sports that don't get any other coverage. You know, they have a bunch of their own tournaments throughout the year, world championships and whatever else, but no one's watching that. No, and, you know, unless your family or an athlete who's participated in one of these sports. But like, when's the last time you tuned into a water polo game in an off-season year? It's just not the case. So,
yeah, I would agree. I think that they set themselves up to be something bigger and not. I've got a question for you. Canadian athletes did really well this year. You mentioned that, you know, there's the women's soccer team, which, you know, we can talk about that and the building of the program up to that. But is this sort of the pinnacle? Is this the last year that we see results related to all the investment that came around the Vancouver Olympics and the seriousness with which of investment that we saw in amateur sports around 2008 and the Olympics? Or 18. When was Vancouver, Jordan? 2010? Yeah. So is this so that we're 10 years removed from that now, 11 years, I guess. Is this the last year that we see sort of that? I guess, is this the pinnacle? Do we see a regression after this year?
No, I don't think so. I think what's hard about it is it's like, you know, whenever you have these kind of outcome-based financial transactions by governments, there's always something we call tails, right? Which are like, what are the lasting connective threads from that the outcome creates? And I think the truth is, when it comes to the Olympics, the biggest tail is always the connection that younger athletes have to the people that they have looked up to and been inspired by, right? And you brought up the women's soccer team. In our second topic, we're going to dig into sort of the results and what our favorite moments were, and we'll talk about the women's soccer. But the women's soccer team is a great example of the legacy of a decade or more of development. And I think that does happen, right? How many young women or how many young men are going to consider taking up swimming because they were inspired by Penny Alexiak? How many people? So yes, the money part of the slogan at the time in 2010 was own the podium, right? And this whole idea that it's our home games, we want to be able to, and I think that there's definitely still remnants of that. I think the Olympic movement in Canada is kind of, I think it hasn't really increased or decreased in a lot of ways since that. I don't it doesn't feel like there's this huge groundswell of people digging into those other sports. Most of the people who find these other sports are finding them because they're either legacies to them, you know, family members have swam or whatever, or because, you know, they fell into it having played a more traditional sport and were like, oh, you're actually really fast. Have you thought about track in this country? We don't have the kind of like development programs that a country like the States or China or one of the big sort of superpowers of Olympic dominance has, which is why you don't see us dominating gymnastics or something where you have to have developed a program for 40 years to really be world class. So I don't know.
Or you have like massive college stuff too. I guess
right.
I guess you see that. I guess what I'm anticipating is that money is dissipating, but obviously, you know, it's flown through multiple years. Can you imagine 10 years ago? You were 17. Now you're competing now at 27, right? Like that. There's a lot of people that in that group that connection was. So I guess just seeing that investment sort of dissolve away. Is this the peak, particularly around summer? But you know, the other thing, it's right.
It's hard to compare, I think, the winter games and the summer games because there's also just such different sports involved. And you know, in Canada, the money and energy has always been in winter sports because that's, you know, we always seem to have had a much more competitive Olympic team just because of the reality of it, right? We have world-class bobsled teams year in and year out. We have world-class skeleton. Part of that legacy goes all the way back to Calgary, right? We have these world-class facilities for training because we've hosted games here. You know, you're not going to find a world-class velodrome the way you would in a city that's hosted an Olympics. You have to fund that and pay for that in a different kind of thing than when you have this sort of incentive to do it. You know?
Well, Dick Pound has got a lot of work ahead of him to keep these results out.
Yeah, Dick Pound. What a guy. All right, that's topic one. We'll leave it there. Hey, guess what? The Ordinary Podcasting Network has a brand new show. If you're a fan of Hat-Trick Sports, then I promise you are going to enjoy the Backyard Basketball Podcast. Braydon Delacoldman, who is one of the hosts of this show here, Hat-Trick, hosts an amazing basketball show with one of his best friends, Christian Steck. Together, the two of them will break down the NBA, news from around the basketball world, and get you caught up on everything you need to know. It's fun, it's fast, they have great conversation and banter, they love basketball, and you will love the Backyard Basketball Podcast. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can also follow them on Instagram at @backyardbasketball_podcast. All right, topic 2. We're going to go Canada-centric for the Olympic Games. Great results. We talked about it. I mentioned it in the top of the show there. 24 medals total, 7 golds, 6 silvers, and 11 bronzes. I don't have the Rio numbers up, but I do remember in London in 2012, we only actually won 1 gold. It was Rosie McLennan. So huge improvement, I suppose, if you want to look at results in that way when it comes to the, capturing the top of the podium. But overall, I mean, just an amazing year for Canadian athletes. And we'll dig into a couple of the storylines, but we have to start with soccer. Obviously, we talked about it again, the legacy of it. What an amazing story. You have, Christine Sinclair, who is probably one of the most famous Canadian athletes outside of hockey to ever play her sport, and is such a huge ambassador for the game. She's the all-time goal scorer for international soccer, men's or women's, period. She's considered by a lot of people around the sports community to just be an absolutely amazing ambassador for the sport, amazing ambassador for the country. She's sort of a very quiet, reserved, traditional Canadian athlete in so many ways. And yet, buried underneath all of that humility, there is also this killer instinct and this absolutely burning hot competitive streak, and she has wanted this gold so badly and fought so hard to get it. This is the absolute pinnacle of women's soccer. The toughest of losses in London, losing in the semifinals after, some controversial refereeing and whatnot. And here she is in the twilight of her career with a much younger team, and all of these players who grew up with her as their idol. And, there just felt like there was something in the air going into this year that this was going to be probably her last chance at this. There was something special about how this team felt. They were all in it for her and all wanted to win it for her. They have to slay the dragon in Canada's biggest foe, the United States, in the semifinal. Not, the exact same storyline as London, semifinal against the big bad Americans. I think they hadn't beat them since 2001. I mean, that's an unbelievable streak. What it made me think of was back in the 1980 Olympics and the Miracle on Ice for the Americans, where they had to beat those damn Soviets, and the Soviets were just this powerhouse who no one could beat. And just like that tournament, they met them in the semifinals. And my fear was, after you beat this big, bad, foe you've had for all these years in the semifinal, do you still have enough emotion to go into the finals? And what an amazing game. I don't know if you watched it live, Elliot. I was up at the crack of dawn to watch it here before going to work, and I'll tell you, it was one of the best sporting events I've ever watched live. And I felt much emotion for Christine. How did you feel?
I mean, I think that's just it, right? This is Sidney Crosby in Vancouver. This is Donovan Bailey. This is one of those Canadian sporting events that will live in infamy forever. Canadian Olympic sporting events that will live in infamy. And just because of all of that, just think about how long it took you to kind of get through and build that story up.
Totally.
And everything that there's been through, like there's so much. And for you and I, like, I think particularly as Edmontonians, like, this dates back to 2002 and the FIFA women's under 19 championship that happened in Edmonton, where that was where Christine Sinclair really broke onto the field. And it was one of the best events for introducing people to women's sport in general. That happened in 2012. And I remember I think we all got tickets because we were students, or it just seemed like everyone was going to 2002. Yeah. But did we get all tickets because we were at school, or they did a hell of a job of marketing or something like that? Like, this story goes back that far in terms of Christine Sinclair, the women's development program. It's all the culmination is all in this moment now, 18 years later, in this gold medal. And so I just think, just because of that, for me personally, but also just everything that's gone into it, this is an event that everyone who watched it, myself included, you'll have that experience for the rest of your life. I'm just so happy for them and so happy for the team. And you're right. It did feel like it was just, there was something different this year, like how they got into the quarters, or how they got into the semis. And then obviously the game with the Americans, and then, probably outplayed in large places of the game by Sweden, but did manage to find a way to win. Like you just sort of like, it was just kind of meant to be. And yeah, just like I said, I think it's just one of those moments that we'll remember for the rest of our lives, and our, even our kids it'll be shared with. I wasn't old enough to remember Donovan Bailey, but I lived that clip of Donovan Bailey after he wins the race. The scream as he's running. There will be a similar one from that game as well too, whether it's the goal or the save or whatever it was.
Yeah, and that there's so many great storylines from, like you said, from the whole thing. But that game, I mean, just what a great reminder of how exciting soccer really is, and how exciting women's soccer is. That was a tight game, and it looked like the Swedes had them on the ropes. And for the second game in a row, they get bailed out by VAR, which I know is controversial. And a lot of people all around the world in men's and women's soccer have had lots of games go their way and go against them because of it. And it's part of the game now, and it was exciting to see have again the next generation. For me, just to wrap up the women's soccer storyline, for me, what was so beautiful about it from a metaphoric storytelling narrative perspective, Christine's taken out near the end of the game. Desiree Scott is taken out near the end of the game. Chapman is taken out near the end of the game. All of these sort of veterans who are on this team for probably the last time, having been through all of these other trips to these games and to the World Cup and hosting the Women's World Cup here in Vancouver and losing again in heartbreaking fashion. Every time they've gotten close, it's just slipped through their fingers. And you watch these women sort of step back and let the next generation say, we've got it. We'll take it from here. We'll close this out for you, Christine. Yeah. It's such a beautiful storyline, right? That it's like, we've got this, but in some way, it's also like, you built this. You know what I mean? Her legacy is the strength of Canadian women's soccer and how dominant they have become, and now the best in the world, which is awesome. So great storyline there. Let's touch on a couple other Canadian stories really quickly while we're here. Big one again from the perspective of coming back into this game after some amazing success. Huge storyline of Rio was obviously Penny Alexiak. She's now the most decorated Canadian Olympian of all time with 7 medals. Unbelievable for someone. Again, she's like, 24? I mean, she's a child still in so many senses, and she could be at maybe 2 more Olympics as a swimmer. Sometimes these guys can go for a while. I don't know how much swimming you watched early on. I know I watched them win the relay originally, but also her legacy being, some of these other swimmers who were successful. You've got golds by Maggie McNeil in swimming. You've got a couple silvers.
Which is a great story. Hey, she didn't even know that she'd won it. Then she couldn't see.
Absolutely. And you've got Kylie Massey, who wins 2 silvers, one in the 100-meter backstroke, one in the 200-meter backstroke. These are all, again, we're entering a golden age of Canadian swimming, especially on the women's side, obviously. But Penny Alexiak, any thoughts on the greatest Canadian Olympian of all time coming in?
Yeah, it's such an amazing story, and I was so proud to. I think everyone did a really good job of recognizing that achievement as soon as she did it. As soon as she did achieve it. It's how often do we think about the best tennis player in the world and not, mention Serena, or similarly in soccer. We had a similar conversation, I think a couple months back around women not being acknowledged in their countries for their achievements, and so I was really pleased that it got picked up as quickly as it did, and it should be celebrated. I mean, 7 Olympic medals is unbelievable, and I think that also just I was fortunate enough to get to listen to some of her post event interviews, and just talking about the challenges and the struggles of being a former gold medalist and expectation management and everything that she was dealing with. And I was just so proud, and I was so impressed by the way in which she handled herself, talking about those challenges that she had experienced leading up to the games, and then obviously how humble she was afterwards. And just like, for me, it's not only am I proud, Canadian that she won, but also just proud that that's the representative of our country, and that's our most decorated athlete, and that's those are the things that really matter for me. And so yeah, absolutely. And I'd echo what you said. I think that there's a really exciting future in women's swimming, for sure, and that's great. I'm glad that Canadian women sports in general have had the success that they had this year. It shows that they're finally getting, and it's probably not equal, but more equal investment and attention from our Olympic Committee, and equal access to facilities and training and funding and all those things. Yep. And if Canada's at the forefront of women's sports, I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. Let's just touch on 2 more really quickly, and then we'll leave the Olympics alone, because I think we've done a pretty good deep dive here. There were really 2 men, I think. Well, there were a couple men who really succeeded for Canada, but 2 that really captured Canada's attention. Obviously, Andre de Grasse, who really, I think, caught everybody's attention last Olympics in Rio when he was neck and neck with Usain Bolt in the 200 meters, and everyone kind of sat up and went, holy smokes, we might have another, world champion runner here in Canada after the legacy of Donovan Bailey. And Andre DeGrasse obviously winning the gold in the 200 meter, which is his better event. He probably starts running because there's a program that's being developed in this country after the legacy of Donovan Bailey, after the,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Johnson too, 100%. But all of that, right?
No, I totally agree. One of the crazy things about Andre DeGrasse, I know we're just touching on him. He's competed in 6 Olympic events and he has 6 Olympic medals.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, he just knows how to win, and he is fantastic. And if you watched the 4x100 meter, they were in 4th place at his handoff or at his transition. He took the baton and he came all the way back up to 3rd, which is not easy to close in a race like that. When you're behind going into the anchor spot, you really have to have some real jets, and he put them on. It was amazing. But the other really crazy story, I think, that surprised a few people was Damian Warner, who won the men's decathlon, which is considered, again, one of the most difficult sports in the Olympics. It's considered the world's best athlete coming out of it. You have the world's fastest man in the 100 meters and the world's fastest male athlete, or the best male athlete coming out of the decathlon, because you've got to have all 10 skills. He was 5th in London. He won the bronze in Rio. So it's not like he came out of nowhere. People saw him coming. But like Andre DeGrasse, I think people still were shocked by how much of an improvement there was in that 4 + 5 years. He scored 8,995 points. I'm not exactly sure how the scoring works, but I do know this.
No, I thought he was in the 9,000s.
He was 9,000? No, I just looked this up because he was 5 points away from the 9,000. So he finished with 8,995. Had he got those extra 5 points, he would have been only the 4th ever. So again, just the level of success by this young man. Set a Canadian record for the event, and again, just like unbelievable performance, and one of those that will go down in the record books is just a truly special moment for Canadian athletics.
Well, also in a time in which it was hard enough to find facilities and space and coaching if you were preparing for one event, let alone trying to prepare during the pandemic for 10 separate events. It was outstanding. Just so ecstatic for him. It's too bad he didn't break the 9,000. I think when I watched him, they initially had thought that he had. So, but anyway, regardless, outstanding.
He was just short. It says he was just short, but unbelievable, right? I mean, just what a finish for him, and I'm just really proud of the guy from London, Ontario. Which is funny too, because I think like 6 or 7 of the medalists were from London, Ontario. Something like a quarter of all medalists were from London, Ontario. So there's something in the water there. For sure, but they're producing Olympians right now. Any last thoughts on the Olympics now that it's done and dusted?
I guess I would say, so the medal count is great and that's outstanding. It's our highest one, as you mentioned, and things like that. But, there's also the gentleman that finished, I think, 5th in the decathlon behind Warner too. And, the gal that was running the 400 meters and doing the hurdles and things like that. There was it felt like there's a lot of top 10s for Canada this year too. It'd be interesting to go back and kind of get the sense of like, because medals are and the podium are the thing that we always keep track of, but I'm interested in how many top 10s, because it felt like there was a lot of Canadians. Well, never mind, there were 2 men running the 200 meter sprint for Canada, right? Like that's something that
made the final. Both of them
that made the final, right? So I think it speaks to an infrastructure that now exists in Canadian athletics that's really exciting, and that was really demonstrated in these games too. So that's my final note that I want.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think we talked about it. It's like, should these games have even happened? All of those question marks that existed. And I think the truth is, it's like, they were going to happen regardless. I think the Olympic movement is such a large and robust machine that eventually it was bound to sort of shove its way through. Not, like every other major sport we've seen, finding a way to do it. We can litigate the morality of it later if we want. But the truth is, I thought it probably was a slightly more subdued Olympic summer than we've had in the past. I think Canada didn't really get as revved up as they have in the past, but I think the success helps with that. They got excited because they kept seeing results. It's always tough. The other thing, just the reality of it, that soccer game was at 5 a.m. It is incredibly tough when the prime time lineup is on the wrong side of the clock, right? Because you're in the far parts of the world. And we can, That's just the reality of it, right? We know that. We remember it from Nagano. We remember it from Beijing. We're going to see Beijing again in a couple months here when we go back for the Winter Games. The truth is, it's hard scheduling wise to make these games sort of fit into people's schedules. So you're kind of following along either by waking up in the morning and finding out what medals you've won and whatever, and maybe PVRing and trying to get it. That's tough. But the reality is,
wow.
I think people did get excited as they kept seeing these great results, and we had some really cool storylines. So I think in the end, success for Canada is what it is. And the games happened, and there we go. Paralympics in a couple weeks. All right, we'll leave it there. Do you or someone you know own a small business? Are you looking to grow or to reach new customers? Hey, why not let us help? Hattrick is looking for unique brands, businesses, and products to advertise on our show. You can find out how we can help spread the word about your business by contacting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. All right, we're going to leave the Olympics there. Our third topic today is dedicated to a very niche sport. No, that's not really fair, but it feels like it is. More and more, Elliott, it feels niche. The CFL is back. For anyone who has been paying attention and cares, it has been a very long time since CFL football was played in this country, 2 years, because they have not had a season. They did not, only major sport, if you can call it major, only major sport in Canada that didn't have a season of some kind. The Blue Jays had to go play in the States. The Raptors had to go play in the States, but the Canadian Football League, even though it's isolated by a border and doesn't have, the same kind of trouble, they just didn't have the money to make it work, and they didn't make it work. So they had to wait a year. They finally get back off the ground. Already we're seeing positive COVID tests, so that's a whole sidebar. Truth is, CFL is back, and after a year and a half to rebrand and retool and prepare themselves, boy oh boy, they kind of came out flat. How do we feel, Elliott, about the CFL being back? Did you watch any of the games? And just general thoughts, I guess. We'll start there.
So it was weird. I was actually very excited for the CFL to come back for the first time in, I think, a good while, 5 or 6 years. And, people who listen to the show for a long time, and Jordan, you know this, my grandfather was a season ticket holder and regularly took me, and I have a real connection to the former Edmonton football team, now Edmonton Elks, and really know the game and actually love the game and really understand it. And so, but in the last 6 years, I'd really struggled. Part of it was some of it was around the name of the team that I supported. Some of it was just that the poor quality of how the game is presented on television. And some of it was just, interest moved to other places. For the first time, I was excited for Canadian football to be back. And I think a 2-year hiatus was good for me in that it sort of reminded me that, this is there's value here, and this is something that I want to follow. So all in all, I'm really, really, really happy that the CFL is back. More happy than I expected to be. There's also this renewed sort of sense of interest, and in that, I have no guilt in cheering for the team because of this. I'm not going to encounter this moral dilemma around their inappropriate name anymore. The Elks are the Elks now. We no longer have to deal with that anymore. And for me, there was sort of guilt kind of lifted off me in that as well too. And I'm an Elks supporter again, and that's okay, and that's good. And I don't have to deal with a stupid name conversation. Not that the conversation itself is stupid, but that it's stupid that we have to deal with it every year because no one was dealing with the situation. So that was a lot of stuff really fast, but I ultimately was really excited for this weekend. And then we could talk about whether the weekend delivered or not later.
Yeah. I wish I held your enthusiasm. I really don't. I wanted so badly to care. I wanted so badly to want it to be good because I, like you, have felt, I haven't watched CFL football in probably 3 or 4 years. I mean, include beyond the pandemic, because I think once I had sort of resolved my own issues around the team and I kind of accepted that I was really uncomfortable with it as a name, I tuned out. I chose not to give them my eyeballs and my money. And, I used to go to a lot of games, not I was never, I actually, that's not true. As a younger person, my father used to buy season tickets at Commonwealth, and we used to go each game. He would take a different kid. So all three of us as brothers would get a different number of games through the year, 2 or 3 each. But that hadn't happened in a long time. And then once I moved to Vancouver, I used to occasionally go to a game when they played here at BC Place. But that hadn't happened in a few years either. I just had sort of tuned out and disengaged. And I remember feeling a couple years ago, like, I kind of miss football the way because I used to really enjoy it. I think this length of time just sort of, I kind of lost it. And I really wanted to be able to say, all right, I'm back because this is such an affirmative thing you've done. I want to be here to support that. I watched probably the first 15 minutes of that football game, and then I went on to other things. I was so bored. I was so disengaged, and I couldn't have cared. And it was frustrating because I really wanted to. And I don't know if it was the presentation from TSN. I don't know if it was the game itself. Maybe it's the fact that I didn't care about those players anymore because I didn't really know who they were. Last time I cheered for the team, it was still like Mike Riley played for them or something. Right. I didn't even know who the coach was for the team, to be completely honest with you. And I was just so disengaged. And I think what's frustrating for me as also like a, armchair media critic of sports media and someone who's a big fan of presentation, like you had a year off, TSN. Get your act together and get this game to feel and look like the 21st century. But it felt like they picked up right where they'd left off. The only change in the graphics package was the new logo. The only change in like the lineup at halftime was that Kate Burness was hosting it because what's his name is Rod Black or whatever his name is now a commentator. I just didn't care, and I thought it was
and Paul Police has left as well too to go and coach.
It was just a poor relaunch. Let me put it.
So I think your last point there. I think your last point there is well made. I think you picked a tough game to re-enter into the CFL. 16-12. There was no offensive touchdowns the entire game. Actually, amazingly, Edmonton had 24 first downs, I think, to Ottawa's 6 the entire game. But it was just simply because of the turnovers that the game was. The Elks lost that game. But, so I think some of this, Jordan, just keep in mind, like tough game to enter back into. And a tough way for the CFL season to sort of end its first week. But I do agree with you around presentation. Virtually nothing is changed. Even their capacity to use technology. It's still that like yellow squiggly line that like they're drawing on the screen that like at one point they were like circling the score and I was killing myself laughing like, oh yeah, we'll use the yellow marker on the screen to signify that the score is important in this game. But like they were trying, there was at one point to play in which the Red Blacks attempted like a lateral off a kickoff. There was a conversation around whether it was a forward pass or a backward pass, and the camera angles that they were able to generate couldn't even sufficiently they couldn't even pull a package together that significantly demonstrated one way or another whether it was a forward pass or not. And it ultimately was ruled that it was, and I think it was too, but like they couldn't even pull a package of shots together. What's a different angle? What's something that we can be doing? The graphics is, mentioning that as invest in, but this is the thing, when you have a monopoly over the coverage of a league, then your quality of the coverage falls apart. And that's always been the issue with the CFL. And 2 years removed, it continues to be a problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
No, totally. And the truth is also we've talked about what's the potential of the XFL helping in some way with the CFL. The CFL is stuck in so many ways as a brand because they are run by people from a different generation than the modern generation of fans. The modern generation of fans is getting older and it's not getting younger. And the reason it's not getting younger is that younger people are going to the NFL because it's a superior product. It's a superior presentation. It's only going to get better now that you've got Amazon and all these competing networks. And that is true, right? Because you have 5 networks that all own coverage. And if one of them tries something different, the other guys have to be, competing with them. You've got TSN with the monopoly in this country, which I get. It's an 8-team league. I get that we're dealing with a different thing. But what the CFL doesn't, I think, understand is that they are not the only game in town. They may think they are because it's the Canadian Football League and they're the only teams playing in these cities. But the truth is you are always competing with the NFL because the NFL is the standard for football. It is the standard for football coverage. It is the standard for what that broadcast looks like. And that is what you are competing with. And like you just pointed out, those camera angles, the expectation of fans is so much higher in terms of what they're seeing. And if you're going to try to bring new fans to your game, you have to meet them where they have already built an expectation. Young fans, I think, are more engaged in the NFL because of fantasy sports, because of online betting and all of these things that are making that game way more fun, even if they don't have a quote unquote home team, because it's just a bigger thing. And I realize you're never going to be able to compete with the NFL, but you have to at least try to meet them part way there and figure out what are the key pieces of that are going to solve this problem. And then what is your brand even supposed to be? Because I feel like the CFL's lost the plot. They don't know who they are.
That's exactly it. The conversation is not necessarily like we need to emulate the NFL, because I think that's actually what they're trying to do, but just with a smaller budget, and they're doing it really poorly. What is your market differentiator? Yeah. What's the thing that makes you different? There's lots of things about the CFL. You know, when the CFL was really kicking ass in the 90s and early 2000s, what were they talking? It's 3-down football. It's fast. There's no fair catch. Bigger field, extra clock. Man, shorter play clock. Things are happening faster. The game moves. Yeah. There was all these things that sort of, those were your market differentiators, right? And that made it, and not only that, but there's nothing a Canadian loves more than attempting to, like, providing a product that's different from the Americans and could be better. Not that I'm saying the CFL is, but, you know, building that sort of pride within your market and within your base. And they've totally lost that. I think that, honestly, I think you're so right on so many parts on that. And I think you don't have to, you're right. You can't compete with the NFL. You just don't have the money. You don't have the audience. You don't have the number of teams. Like that's not where you need to be, but you need to be able to decipher that market differentiator. And here's another year where everyone's saying that to the CFL and everyone's saying that to TSN, and we get the same effing product with just like more culturally appropriate team names.
Yeah. All right. That's our show for this week. We will leave it there. Thank you, Elliott. I appreciate you showing up. And it was fun. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Hat Trick Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and have a good week. That was Hat Trick. Hat Trick is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. It's produced every week by Jordan Dowler-Coltman and Braydon Dowler-Coltman. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.